The town of Dry Creek sat under a bruised sky, the wind dragging dust across its single street. The sun was high, merciless, and the sound of flies was louder than the preacher's old bell. People had gathered outside the trading post, men mostly, some sober, some drunk already, waiting for something mean and ugly that passed as entertainment in those parts. They called it an auction. She stood there, roped and filthy, her dark hair tangled, her wrists bound. Her name was Nayeli, though no one there cared to know it. To them she was just the Indian woman, a remnant of the dying Apache, a prize of war and circumstance. Her eyes, deep as storm clouds, did not plead. They burned with something else. Defiance, maybe. Or the last flame of a dying pride. The auctioneer barked, "Start in at $5. A few men laughed. One spat, "Ain't worth a feed to keep her alive?" Someone muttered. A voice from the edge of the crowd cut through the noise. "I'll take her." The crowd turned. A tall man leaned against the hitching post, hat low, a dusted duster coat brushing his boots. His horse stood behind him, a chestnut mare with one white eye. The man's voice was calm, measured, with a rasp of the trail in it. "That's so, Mason." The auctioneer grinned. "You fixing to start keepin' women now?" Luke Mason didn't answer. He counted out the bills slow and deliberate, dropped them into the man's hand, and stepped forward. "Cut her loose." The rope fell away. Nayeli didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared at him. Unsure whether this was another kind of prison. Luke handed her a canteen. "Drink," he said. She hesitated. The crowd jeered again. Catcalls, jokes about taming wild things, but Luke's gaze silenced them faster than a drawn gun. She took the canteen finally, the water spilling down her chin, her throat working in desperate gulps. When she was done, he said quietly, "You're cumin with me. I don't aim to hurt you." She didn't understand all the words, but she understood tone. He spoke plain, not cruel. Still, she followed like a ghost, silent, half believing she'd be traded again by sundown. They rode for hours, leaving Dry Creek behind, the red earth stretching out like an ocean. Luke didn't speak much, only now and then offering water or pointing out shade when the heat became too much. He noticed the scars along her wrists, the hollowness of her cheeks. Whoever had held her before had done worse than hunger. By dusk, they reached his ranch, a lonely spread of land tucked between the buttes, a barn, a cabin, a few cattle. Smoke drifted from the chimney. The smell of beans and coffee lingered. He dismounted and helped her down. She was too weak to resist, her body trembling. He led her inside. "Sit." He poured her a tin cup of coffee, added sugar, then slid a plate toward her: bread, beans, a sliver of jerky. She ate slowly, suspiciously at first, then with urgency she couldn't hide. He didn't look away or pity her. After a long silence, he said, "You got a name?" She hesitated, then whispered Nayeli. He nodded once. "Nayeli, I'm Luke." She looked at him, the lines of sun and sorrow across his face, the quiet behind his eyes. He was no saint, that much was clear, but he wasn't like the others. Something about the way he watched her, not as a possession, but as a person he didn't yet understand, stirred the first fragile breath of safety she'd felt in months. Outside, coyotes called to the rising moon. Inside, the silence between them began to thaw, slow, uncertain, but real Nayeli didn't know if she had been saved or merely postponed her suffering. But when Luke tossed her a blanket and said, "You can rest easy here," she almost believed him. For the first time since she'd been taken, she slept without dreaming of chains. The first morning at Luke Mason's cabin came quietly, with the sun spilling gold across the desert hills. Nayeli woke to the smell of wood smoke and coffee, the sounds of the ranch slowly stirring, a horse nickering, cattle lowing in the distance. Her body ached in ways she had almost forgotten were possible, muscles stiff from neglect, joints sore from chains and riding. Yet, somehow, it was a different kind of ache, one not entirely from suffering. Luke was already outside, tending to the horses. He worked with methodical patience, brushing the chestnut mare's coat until it gleamed, tightening saddles, checking harnesses. She watched from the doorway, silent, wrapped in the blanket he had given her. It was a simple cabin, a single room with a loft for sleeping, a fireplace, and a small table. Nothing fancy, but it smelled of safety, of earth and labor, and for the first time in months, Nayeli felt a spark of possibility. Luke glanced over his shoulder. "Morning," he said simply. His voice was rough but not unkind. "Morning," she replied, careful, cautious. She wasn't used to speaking freely. The few words she had spoken in Dry Creek had been ignored or mocked. Here, he listened. That made her uneasy and hopeful. He handed her a tin cup filled with coffee, thick with sugar. She took it, though the bitterness made her grimace. "Eat," he said, setting a plate of bread and jerky beside her. "You need it." Nayeli hesitated. Her body remembered hunger too well, not just the gnawing emptiness, but the sharp sting of betrayal and exposure. Eating in front of someone, unashamed, was unfamiliar. But Luke didn't judge. He didn't pry. He just waited. Over the next few days, she began to move more freely around the cabin and the ranch. She helped with chores, carrying water, feeding chickens, mending fences. Luke taught her to handle a gun, to recognize tracks of animals, and to read the clouds for approaching storms. It was grueling work, but there was a rhythm to it, a way that life could be measured without the constant fear that had haunted her since. Dry Creek. Luke never forced conversation, yet he spoke when he thought she might need it. "You don't have to talk if you don't want," he said one afternoon as they mended the fence together, hands brushing occasionally against each other. "But I want you to know I won't hurt you. Not ever." Nayeli's eyes flicked toward him. The sincerity in his gaze was almost alien. No one had promised her safety without expecting something in return. Not the soldiers. Not the traders. Not the men who had laughed at the auction block. But Luke wasn't like them. Night fell quickly in the desert, and the stars lit the sky like scattered embers. Nayeli sat by the fireplace in the cabin, watching the flames dance. Luke joined her silently, sitting on a crate across the room, his gaze on the fire but somehow aware of her presence. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. "Miss what?" she replied, cautious. "Your home, your people, the life before, all of that." Nayeli's chest tightened. She did miss it. The sounds of her village, the songs of her people, the wind across the mesas at dawn. But those memories were bittersweet, tied forever to loss and fear. She didn't speak. Instead, she allowed herself a small nod. Luke didn't push. He understood silence too well. Over the next week, they fell into a rhythm of coexistence that was almost tender in its simplicity. Luke respected her space, her culture, her unspoken boundaries. Nayeli, in turn, learned that kindness didn't always mask cruelty. The small acts of care, a warm meal, a soft blanket, a steady hand when she faltered began to build trust she had long believed impossible. One evening, as the sun sank behind the buttes and painted the sky in streaks of crimson and violet, Luke handed her a small bundle. Inside was a simple dress, handmade, clean, and soft. "For you," he said, his voice unusually gentle. "No one's gonna take you back." Nayeli's fingers trembled as she touched the fabric. It was more than clothing, it was a symbol that she could survive, that she might even live, and perhaps, in the quiet moments, she could allow herself to hope. For the first time since Dry Creek, Nayeli felt a fragile sense of belonging. She didn't yet trust the future, nor did she fully trust Luke. But she could sit by the fire and imagine warmth beyond survival, and that was enough for now. Outside, the coyotes' calls rose with the moon, a haunting reminder of the wild world beyond. Inside, two strangers, one broken by circumstance, one hardened by life, began to forge a bond neither had expected. A bond that would be tested by the harshness of the frontier and the persistence of the past. And in that small cabin, under the vast desert sky, hope quietly took root. The days on Luke Mason's ranch began to settle into a rhythm, but peace is a fragile thing in the West. Even as Nayeli learned the cadence of farm life, the early chores, the tending of animals, the quiet moments by the fire, the shadows of her past stretched long and dark. One morning, as the sun burned gold across the desert, Nayeli went to the barn to feed the horses. She hummed softly, a song she had learned as a child, and for a moment, the memory of her home felt almost tangible. The scent of pine and earth, the laughter of her family, it all lingered in her chest. But then a sudden noise snapped her back to the present, the unmistakable crack of a rifle in the distance. Her heart jumped. She froze, scanning the horizon. Dust rose faintly from the far end of the valley. Luke appeared behind her. His hat-low eyes narrowed. "Trouble," he said simply, his hand resting near his gun. "Stay close." They moved cautiously toward the rising dust, horses tensed, muscles coiled. As they approached, a rider emerged, a man on a gray horse, dressed in worn leather, face shadowed by a wide hat. But it wasn't just any man. It was someone who made Nayeli's stomach tighten with fear. A trader from Dry Creek. One of the men who had bid on her at the auction. He reined in his horse a few yards away, tipping his hat in a mocking gesture. Well, he drawled. "Didn't expect to find you alive, little Apache." Nayeli felt the old panic rise. The cold chain of fear that had haunted her since the auction block. Luke stepped in front of her, positioning himself so the man would have to reckon with him first. You got business with me. Not her, Luke said, his voice low and steady. The trader smirked. Oh, I think she'll want to hear this. He reached for a paper, waving it lightly. Naomi's eyes flicked to it. A notice of claim. Some twisted legal excuse to take her from Luke. The words made her stomach churn. The law was no protector here. It had only ever been a weapon. Luke's hand hovered over his gun. I said step off. You try anything, and it won't be just words that carry you away. The man laughed, a cruel, rattling sound. You think a cowboy cares for an Indian woman. She's nothing but trouble, Mason. Don't say I didn't warn you. Naomi's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the fear made her silent. Luke placed a steady hand on her shoulder, grounding her, letting her know she wasn't alone. After what felt like an eternity, the man spurred his horse and left, disappearing into the dust and sun glare. The threat remained, lingering in the air like smoke. Nahil's knees nearly gave out, and she sank against the barn, shivering. Luke knelt beside her. They can't take you if you don't let them, he said. I won't let them. You hear me? She nodded, swallowing hard, trying to quiet the storm inside her. Her voice came out in a whisper. I thought I was free. You are, Luke said, and I'll fight to keep it that way. You don't have to do it alone. 4 hours afterward, they worked together, repairing fences and tending the horses, the physical labor grounding them both. Yet Naomi couldn't shake the image of the trader's smirk, the memory of Dry Creek, the hunger, the fear. Her past had clawed its way into the present, and it would not leave easily. That evening, under the soft glow of lantern light, Naomi sat by the fire, mending a torn blanket. Luke joined her, handing her a cup of coffee. She hesitated before accepting it, then sipped slowly, tasting safety in its warmth. I know it's hard, he said quietly. The past, it doesn't just vanish, but you've got a choice now. You can let it rule you, or you can learn that it doesn't have to. Her hands shook slightly, not from the chill, but from the weight of memory. Naomi looked into the flames and allowed herself a small, fragile truth. She did not want to be ruled by fear anymore, and maybe, just maybe, she could trust Luke enough to let him help her stand. Outside, the desert night was alive with whispers, the wind in the mesquite, the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of small creatures moving unseen. Within the cabin, the bond between the cowboy and the woman he had saved deepened, tempered by shared survival and mutual respect. For Naomi, the shadows of the past were not gone, but now, for the first time, she saw the possibility of stepping out of them, hand in hand with someone who had chosen to stand by her, not against her. And in the quiet of that desert night, under the watchful stars, hope endured, fragile, flickering, but unbroken. The desert heat softened as autumn approached, and the horizon was streaked with gold in the mornings. Life on Luke Mason's ranch was still hard, but in its own rugged way, it had begun to feel like home for Naomi. The daily chores, the rhythm of the horses, the smell of wood smoke mingling with earth, they were constant, grounding, and comforting. But beneath the practicality, a different kind of tension had begun to rise, one she neither understood fully nor could ignore. Luke noticed it first. He saw the way Naomi lingered a moment too long when he handed her a tool, the quick glance she stole when he was near, and the softening of her eyes when they met his. He, too, felt the stirrings, an unfamiliar tug in his chest whenever she smiled, a quiet ache when she fell silent, lost in thought. They were two souls scarred by the harshness of the frontier, and, slowly, almost imperceptibly, their defenses began to slip. One afternoon, Luke had her help repair a broken corral fence near the northern ridge. The sun was high, sweat dripping from their brows, but the work kept their minds occupied. As they lifted a heavy timber together, their hands brushed once, twice, and an electric current of awareness passed through both of them. Naomi's pulse quickened, though she tried to mask it. Luke's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to such distractions, but he didn't pull away. After a long stretch of labor, they paused, leaning against the fence, catching their breath. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and distant sage, a reminder of the vast, wild world surrounding them. You work fast, Luke said, breaking the silence. His voice low and steady. Naomi offered a small, tired smile. I have to, she admitted softly. The desert does not forgive weakness. He chuckled, a rare sound that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. No, it doesn't. But it seems you are stronger than most. Her gaze dropped to her hands, rough and calloused from labor. I have to be, she said. Otherwise, her voice faltered. She didn't need to finish. He knew the horrors she had endured. He had seen the echoes in her eyes, the remnants of chains and hunger, the traces of fear still lurking beneath her surface. Luke reached out, gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Nayeli's eyes lifted to meet his, wide and uncertain, but not afraid. Something unspoken passed between them. Acknowledgement, trust, a fragile connection neither had dared to name. That night, after the chores were done and the fire in the cabin was glowing low, Luke and Nayeli sat outside, watching the stars appear one by one. The desert was quiet except for the soft hoot of an owl and the distant calls of coyotes. "I never thought I'd find this," Luke said, gesturing vaguely at the ranch, at her, at the life they were carving out together. His voice was rough, but there was a vulnerability beneath it she hadn't heard before. Nayeli tilted her head, studying him. "This what?" she asked. "This safety, companionship. You?" His words were simple, unpolished, but honest. Her chest tightened, her heart stirring in ways she hadn't allowed herself for a long time. She hesitated, then admitted softly, "I never thought someone would care. Not after all I've been through." Luke reached for her hand, his large calloused fingers enveloping hers. "I care," he said firmly. "I'm not just talking about keeping you alive. I mean, you, all of you." Her breath caught. For months, she had lived in survival mode, protecting herself from pain, from betrayal, from hope. And now, here it was, hope, tender and fragile, but real. She squeezed his hand in return. A quiet acknowledgement of something more than trust, the beginning of love. In the days that followed, their bond deepened in small, intimate ways. Shared meals, quiet conversations by the fire, laughter over the smallest of frustrations, and the comforting knowledge that, whatever the world might throw at them, they had each other. Every gesture, every glance, every touch became a thread weaving their hearts closer together. Yet, despite the peace of the moment, the frontier had a way of reminding them of its dangers. Dust swirled on distant trails, shadows moved in the canyons, and the memories of Nayeli's past never strayed far. Love was blooming, yes, but it existed in a world where threats could come with the wind. That night, as they sat side by side watching the stars, Nayeli finally allowed herself to rest her head on Luke's shoulder. He stiffened for a moment, then relaxed, drawing her slightly closer. For a fleeting moment, she believed she could be safe, she could be loved, and the darkness of her past could be held at bay. But somewhere beyond the ridges, the past was stirring and the desert was patient, waiting for the moment it could reclaim what had once been lost. The wind rose early that morning, carrying with it the scent of dust and rain from the distant mesas. Luke Mason stood at the edge of the pasture, scanning the horizon. His eyes, trained by years of riding the frontier, caught movement before it fully revealed itself. 3 riders, dust swirling around them, approaching fast. "Trouble," he muttered under his breath, and his hand instinctively brushed the holster at his hip. Inside the cabin, Nayeli was gathering water from the cistern. She noticed Luke's sudden alertness and the tightening of his jaw. Fear, familiar but unwelcome, stirred in her chest. He looked back at her, eyes dark with concern. "Stay inside, lock the doors." Nayeli obeyed without question, her hands trembling slightly as she secured the cabin. Months of trust had built a fragile peace between them, but the frontier rarely allowed peace to last. The riders were men from Dry Creek, the same ones who had once bid for Nayeli. They carried no pretense now. The malice in their eyes was clear. Luke met them at the edge of his land, riding his chestnut mare with steady confidence. Nayeli watched from the window, heart pounding. "Luke Mason," the leader called, voice loud, carrying over the wind. "Hand her over. You don't own what ain't yours." Luke didn't respond immediately. His eyes flicked to Nayeli's face, seeing the fear she tried to hide. Then he squared his shoulders. "She's not yours," he said flatly. "She's free, and she stays here." The leader sneered. "Free? She's property in the eyes of the law. Step aside, or we take what's owed." Luke's hand hovered near his gun, but he didn't draw yet. He knew the law could be twisted, and brute force was often the only answer in the West. Nayeli's eyes filled with a mix of fear and admiration. He wasn't bluffing. "Go home," Luke said again, calm but firm. "You won't get her from me." The men laughed cruelly, spurring their horses closer. Dust choked the air, and Nayeli could hear the faint rattle of spurs. She gripped the window frame, wishing she could help, but knowing that Luke had to face this head-on. Shots rang out. Luke fired first, aiming to disable, not kill, using his experience to control the chaos. The men scattered briefly, cursing and firing back. Nayeli ducked behind the table, heart racing. but she could feel the rhythm of Luke's presence outside. Steady, protective, resolute. By the time the dust settled, 2 of the men had retreated into the horizon, leaving only the leader, who had been grazed by Luke's bullet in the leg. He cursed and fled, leaving Luke standing tall, chest heaving, sweat and dust coating his face. Nayeli rushed outside, ignoring the dust and heat, and ran to him. He turned, catching her in his arms, holding her close. For a long moment, they simply stood together, breathing each other in, letting the danger pass without words. "You okay?" Luke asked, his voice rough but gentle. I am," Nayeli whispered. "Because of you." Luke shook his head, brushing dust from her hair. "You're the brave one. You stayed calm when it mattered. That's what saved us." They returned to the cabin, shutting the doors and windows against the rising wind. Outside, dark clouds rolled over the mesas, echoing the storm that had passed and warning of more to come. That night, as the rain finally began to fall, drumming against the roof, Nayeli sat close to Luke, sharing the small warmth of the fire. They didn't need words. The storm outside mirrored the storm they had faced together and survived. Their bond had been tested, and the trust between them had deepened. "I thought I'd never see safety again," Nayeli admitted softly, resting her head on his shoulder. "But I have it now." Luke kissed her hair lightly, holding her close. "We fight together. Whatever comes, we face it as one." Outside, the wind howled and rain soaked the desert earth, but inside the cabin, 2 hearts beat in quiet rhythm, steadfast against the threats of the frontier. The storm had passed, but the horizon still held shadows. For Nayeli and Luke, life on the frontier was far from safe. Yet, in that moment, they discovered something stronger than fear, the courage to face tomorrow. Together, the morning after the storm, the desert air smelled fresh, like earth and rain mingled with wild sage. Luke and Nayeli worked quietly, repairing fences and tending the animals. But the tension from the previous day lingered like a shadow neither could shake. They both knew that the Dry Creek men wouldn't give up easily, and neither could ignore the past that had been clawing at Nayeli's life for years. As they mended a broken section of corral, Nayeli paused, her hands hovering over the weathered wood. Her gaze drifted to the horizon, distant mesas shrouded in mist. "Luke," she began, voice low, hesitant, "there's something I need to tell you." Luke looked up from the hammer in his hands, sensing the gravity in her tone. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "The men who came yesterday, they weren't just after me because of what happened in Dry Creek. There's someone higher up, someone who wants to use me, to make money off me. He's dangerous." Luke's eyes narrowed, the muscles in his jaw tightening. He set the hammer down and stepped closer. "Who?" he asked, his voice firm but quiet. "I don't know his name," Nayeli admitted, "but he's the one who bought me after the auction. He's powerful. He has men everywhere. I tried to run before, and they hunted me. I thought I was safe with you, but..." Her voice faltered, fear flashing in her eyes. Luke took her hands in his, strong and steady, anchoring her. "Nayeli, listen to me. You're not going anywhere alone. Not now, not ever. I'll face him if he comes. You're not a prize to be taken. You're my partner. You're mine to protect." Her breath caught. The words weren't just protection. They were a declaration, unspoken until now. She had spent so long being treated as property, as an object to be bought and sold, that Luke's words shook her to her core. I want to believe that," she whispered. Luke cupped her face, brushing a strand of damp hair from her forehead. "Then believe it. I won't let anyone hurt you. Not them. Not anyone." For a few moments, they stood in silence, hearts beating in unison. The bond between them, forged through shared survival and mutual respect, deepened into something stronger, something that neither chains nor threats could break. But the desert is rarely forgiving, and secrets have a way of surfacing at the worst possible time. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a rider appeared on the ridge, a lone figure silhouetted against the fading light. Nayeli froze, heart hammering. Luke moved instantly, positioning himself between her and the rider. The figure reined in closer. It was a woman, mounted on a black mare, cloak billowing in the wind. Her face was partially hidden, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. "Luke Mason," she called. "That's me," Luke said, voice cautious. "I have a message for the Apache woman," the rider said, her tone clipped. "A warning. You're past. It's not done with you, and if you don't follow orders, someone you care about will pay." Nayeli's breath caught, the fear and memories of Dry Creek crashing back in an instant. Luke's hand tightened on the reins, eyes blazing. "You leave now," he growled. or I make you regret staying." The woman smirked, her horse pawing the ground. "You can't protect her forever. The world is bigger than your cabin, cowboy." The man who bought her, he's watching, always watching. Then she was gone, riding into the dusk, leaving a trail of dust and unease. Nayeli sank to the ground, shaking. Luke knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around her, pulling her close. "You see," she whispered, "he's still out there. He'll never stop." Luke pressed his forehead to hers. "Let him try. We'll face him together. You and me. No one touches you while I'm breathing." For the first time in years, Nayeli felt a flicker of defiance mingle with her fear. She wasn't alone. She had Luke, someone who truly cared, someone who would fight for her. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to face the storms still to come. Outside, the desert night settled in, quiet but alive. Shadows lingered, reminders that danger could strike at any moment. But inside the cabin, two hearts beat together, strong and steady, ready to face whatever the horizon might bring. The secrets of the past were still out there, lurking, waiting. But Nayeli had discovered something far more powerful: love, trust, and the courage to fight, not just to survive, but to live. The desert morning was crisp and still, the kind of morning that carried both promise and warning. Luke Mason stood at the edge of the ridge, scanning the horizon with a practiced eye. Nayeli was beside him, hands entwined with his, her heart racing but steady. After the warning from the mysterious rider, they knew the danger lurking in the shadows of her past was real, and it was closing in. "You ready?" Luke asked, his voice low but steady. Nayeli nodded, swallowing hard. "I am with you." They had spent weeks preparing, fortifying the cabin, gathering supplies, and planning escape routes through the canyons and mesas surrounding the ranch. But this wasn't just about running. It was about standing their ground. Nayeli had survived so much, but she wasn't willing to let fear dictate the rest of her life. Not now. The first sign of trouble appeared just as the sun burned gold over the desert, dust swirling on the eastern trail. A small band of riders approached, led by a tall man with cold, hard eyes. The one who had purchased Nayeli years ago, the man who had haunted her nightmares. He was flanked by several men, all armed and ready. Luke stepped forward, placing himself between Nayeli and the approaching danger. "You've come for nothing," he called. "She's not going anywhere with you." The man's smile was cruel. "You can't hide her forever, Mason. She belongs to me, and I intend to claim what's mine." Nayeli's chest tightened, but she didn't move back. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with newfound defiance. "I'm not yours," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I never was." Luke's hand brushed hers, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. Then, with a practiced motion, he drew his revolver, and the tension crackled across the desert like lightning. The confrontation was intense but brief. Luke's knowledge of the land and quick thinking allowed him to outmaneuver the men. Dust and gunsmoke filled the air as he used the ridges and rocks to his advantage, drawing the attackers into vulnerable positions. Nayeli stayed close, but this time, she wasn't just a bystander. She had learned to move quietly, anticipate danger, and act when needed. Together, they formed a seamless unit, a partnership forged in trust, survival, and love. By midday, the attackers were retreating, wounded and beaten, forced to recognize that Nayeli was no prize to be claimed, and Luke Mason was no man to be underestimated. The man who had purchased her fell back last, glaring with rage. But finally, the desert swallowed him, and freedom remained unbroken. Luke lowered his revolver, breathing hard. Nayeli ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. "We did it," she whispered, tears of relief and joy mixing with dust on her cheeks. The tension of the past months seemed to lift, replaced by a rare, quiet peace. They walked back to the cabin together, hand in hand, feeling the warm weight of freedom settle over them like sunlight. The desert, once a harsh and unforgiving place, now felt alive with possibility, a canvas for the life they would build together. That evening, they sat outside by a fire, stars emerging one by one in the deepening sky. Luke draped an arm around Nayeli, pulling her close. "You're safe now," he said softly, "and you always will be." Nayeli rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I know," she murmured, "not just because you fight for me, but because we fight together. That's what makes me strong." Luke kissed her hair gently. "We're stronger than any danger, stronger than any past. And now, we can look forward, not back." The desert stretched endlessly before them, vast and untamed, full of both danger and beauty. But for Nayeli and Luke, it was no longer a place of fear. It was a place of life, love, and promise. They had survived the chains of the past, the threats of the present, and emerged stronger, bound not by fear or ownership, but by choice, trust, and the deep bond they had forged as dawn broke the next day. Painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, they rode out together across the mesas, wind in their hair, hearts beating in rhythm. The horizon was wide open and free, a reflection of the new life they had claimed. In that moment, Nayeli understood that freedom wasn't just the absence of chains. It was the courage to love, to trust, and to step forward into the unknown, hand in hand with the one who had saved her, and whom she had learned to love in return. The desert would always hold its challenges, but together, they were unstoppable, and for the first time in her life, Nayeli Mason truly felt at home.